They said the House of Veilcrest had never known scandal. Its marble halls had witnessed betrayals whispered behind velvet fans, alliances sealed over candlelit feasts, and cold marriages arranged like chess moves, but never disgrace, never exile. Never a duchess cast out beneath a storm with nothing but the child in her womb and the weight of a name stripped from her, until Seraphine Veilcrest stood at the iron gates, her silk cloak drenched in rain, her hands trembling not from fear but from fury she refused to show. The night smelled of wet stone and burned roses, and somewhere behind her the estate she once ruled glowed faintly, lanterns flickering like indifferent stars. Hours earlier she had stood in the grand hall, surrounded by nobles who once bowed to her, now watching as her husband, Duke Alaric Veilcrest, pronounced her unworthy. He did not shout, he never did. His voice was quiet, precise, and far more devastating because of it. He accused her of betrayal, of carrying a child that was not his, of tarnishing a lineage older than the kingdom itself. Seraphine had laughed then. Not loudly, not hysterically, just a single sharp breath that cut through the hall because she knew something they did not. Truth was rarely as powerful as the version people chose to believe, and tonight the aristocracy had chosen their story. Leave before dawn, Alaric had said, his gaze colder than the marble beneath their feet, and never return. Now dawn was still hours away. Yet the gates were already closing behind her. The guards did not meet her eyes. The servants she had protected, rewarded, even saved from ruin, none stepped forward. Loyalty, she realized, was a currency that expired the moment power vanished. Her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, where the child stirred faintly, but alive, unquestionably alive. "You will not be born into shame," she whispered into the storm, her voice barely breaking through the rain. "I will not allow it." The carriage waiting beyond the gates was not hers. No crest, no mark of nobility, only worn wood and a driver who avoided her gaze. That, more than anything, made her smile. Let them think she was finished. Let them believe she would disappear into obscurity, swallowed by distant provinces and forgotten like a scandal buried under newer gossip. They did not understand Seraphine Veilcrest. She stepped into the carriage without assistance, the door shutting with a hollow thud that sounded like a verdict. As the wheels began to turn, she did not look back at the towering spires or the life stolen from her, or the man who had cast her out with a sentence that would haunt him far, longer than it haunted her. Because even now, beneath the ache and betrayal, something else burned: calculation. The accusation had been too perfect, too convenient. Letters appeared at the right time, witnesses spoke with rehearsed certainty. Even the physician's report had arrived with suspicious speed. Someone had orchestrated this, someone powerful enough to bend truth inside the Duke's own court, and Seraphine intended to find out who. The road stretched endlessly into darkness, lined with skeletal trees clawing at the sky as the storm softened into a steady drizzle. Hours passed before the driver finally spoke, cautious and uncertain. "Where to, my lady?" She hesitated only a moment before answering with a name she had not spoken in years: Arundel. The word carried weight, a forgotten territory far from court politics where titles mattered less than survival. A place where a fallen duchess could vanish or rebuild. The driver nodded and did not ask questions. As the carriage moved deeper into the unknown, Seraphine leaned back, closing her eyes for the first time since the exile began, not in surrender but in focus, because grief had already passed through her and left something harder behind. They had taken her title, her home, her place in society, but they had made one fatal mistake. They had let her live, and Seraphine Veilcrest was not a woman who faded quietly into shadows. Before we continue, tell me this. Do you believe Seraphine was truly betrayed by the Duke, or was she trapped in a game far bigger than even him?
Just when Seraphine Veilcrest begins uncovering the hidden trade routes and corruption buried deep inside Arundel, One truth becomes impossible to ignore. This was never just exile, it was a carefully designed removal. Someone inside the highest ranks of the aristocracy needed her gone. But the real question is, why her? And what was so dangerous about her position, that even her unborn child became part of the silence they tried to enforce? As Cale Draven opens the sealed ledgers, everything she believed about the noble court begins to collapse into a far darker pattern. And at this point, Seraphine is no longer searching for justice alone. She is searching for the architect of her downfall. But if you were Seraphine right now, would you continue digging for the truth? Or would you prepare for revenge before the enemy strikes again? Comment your thoughts below and tell me where you are watching from. Because what happens next changes everything.
The road to Arendelle was not marked on most aristocratic maps. It was the kind of place noble families pretended did not exist, too remote to matter, too poor to influence politics, and too forgotten to be worth conquering. Yet for Seraphine Veilcrest it became something else entirely. A place where endings were not final. By the time the carriage crossed the broken stone bridge into the territory, the storm had faded into a cold mist. Dawn broke weakly over jagged hills and abandoned farmland. The driver did not speak. He only pointed once toward a distant settlement built around a fractured watchtower. That was all Arendelle offered the world. Survival, not splendor. Seraphine stepped down carefully, her ivory gown now dulled with travel and dust. The sapphire cloak still clung to her shoulders, but its color had faded under rain and distance. She did not look like a duchess anymore. She looked like something worse in the eyes of the aristocracy, someone erased, yet her posture did not break. The settlement greeted her with silence. Not hostility, not warmth, just indifference. People watched from doorways as she passed. They saw the elegance in her spine, the restraint in her movements, and they immediately understood she did not belong there. That alone made her dangerous. At the edge of the settlement stood an old structure, half manor, half ruin. Ivy crawled up cracked stone walls, and broken windows stared like hollow eyes. A wooden sign creaked above the entrance. Arendelle House. This is where you were sent, the driver finally said, avoiding her gaze. No servants, no title, no protection. Seraphine nodded once. That is enough. It was not pride that made her say it. It was survival. Inside, the air smelled of dust and forgotten years. The floors creaked under every step, and yet the structure still stood. Barely, but stubbornly, she placed her hand against a cold stone pillar and closed her eyes for a moment. Not in weakness. In assessment. Every ruin had a history, and every history had leverage. A sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're standing in the wrong place for a dead woman." Seraphine turned slowly. A man stood at the far end of the hall. Tall, lean, dressed in dark, travel-worn attire rather than noble clothing. His hair was ash-brown, tied loosely, and his gaze carried the sharpness of someone who had seen too many betrayals to be impressed by elegance. He studied her like a problem, not a person. "I am not dead," Seraphine replied calmly. The man gave a faint, humorless smile. "Not yet. But Arendelle has a way of finishing what the capital starts." There was no bow, no courtesy, only truth stripped of etiquette. "I am Cale Draven," he said at last. "I manage what is left of this territory, or what is ignored of it." "Then you understand neglect," Seraphine replied. That made him pause, just slightly. For the first time since her exile, someone did not look at her as a scandal. They looked at her as a mind. Cale stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the faint swell beneath her ruined cloak. "You shouldn't have come here alone." "I was not given a choice," she answered. A long silence followed. Outside, wind pressed against broken windows like distant judgment. Then Cale spoke again, quieter this time. "The capital cast you out. It was not a question." Seraphine's expression did not change. "They believed I betrayed my husband, and did you?" That question should have broken her. It did not. Instead, something colder settled behind her eyes. "No," she said, "but someone wanted them to believe I did." For the first time, Cale's expression shifted. not sympathy, recognition. He had seen schemes before, just not one this clean. Cale turned away, walking toward a cracked balcony overlooking the barren land. Arundel has nothing but debts, abandoned routes, and broken trade records. It's a graveyard of politics. Seraphine followed his gaze. Then it is honest. That made him glance back at her. A long pause stretched between them before he finally said, "If you stay here, you will be watched, not by nobles. By people who survive by trading secrets." "Good," she replied. "Then I will not need to search for them." That was the moment Cale understood she had not come here to hide. She had come to rebuild something the aristocracy would never expect from a caste: out-Duchess control. Days passed, though time in Arundel felt different. There were no banquets, no court rituals, no shifting alliances masked as conversation, only labor, observation, and silence that revealed more than words ever could. Seraphine learned quickly. The territory's records were incomplete but not useless. Trade routes, once promised to Arundel, had been diverted without explanation. Taxes had been collected in the capital's name but never reinvested locally. Entire shipments vanished between checkpoints that officially did not exist. It was not neglect, it was extraction. Someone was draining Arundel dry while pretending it was already dead, and that someone had ties to the capital. One evening, Cale found her in the ruined archive room surrounded by torn ledgers and scattered correspondence. "You haven't slept," he said. "I have slept enough to be lied to," she replied, without looking up. He stepped closer, glancing at the documents. "You're tracing shipments." "I'm tracing patterns," she corrected. "Patterns always lead to intent." Cale studied her for a moment longer. "And what intent do you see?" Seraphine finally looked up. Her emerald eyes were no longer only wounded. They were focused now, sharpened. "Someone is building wealth through disappearance," she said, "and my exile was part of the same machinery." A cold silence filled the room. Outside, thunder faintly in the distance, though the sky was clear. Cale spoke quietly. "If you are right, you are not dealing with a noble dispute." Seraphine closed the ledger slowly. "I never was." That night she stood alone on the broken balcony of Arundel House. The wind moved through her hair like memory refusing to settle. Her hand rested again over her unborn child. "You were cast into the wrong story," she whispered, "but I will rewrite it, far away beyond ruined borders and forgotten roads." The aristocracy believed Seraphine Veilcrest had vanished into irrelevance. They were wrong, because exile had not weakened her. It had redirected her, and somewhere in the silence of Arundel, the first threads of something far greater than survival had already begun to tighten into place. A return was forming, not yet seen, not yet spoken, but inevitable. The capital of Luther had not changed in appearance, but it had changed in spirit. The same marble streets still gleamed under sunlit carriages. The same golden spires still pierced the sky like declarations of eternal power, and the same aristocratic houses still whispered behind gilded doors. But beneath all of it now lay something quieter, unease, because rumors once dismissed had begun to return. They spoke of Arundel no longer as a dead territory, but as a growing force. Trade routes that had been lost for years were suddenly redirected. Missing funds long written off in royal ledgers were quietly resurfacing under new ownership seals. Entire merchant caravans now carried the same unfamiliar insignia, a single crescent stitched over a broken crown. No one knew what it meant, but everyone feared it anyway. Inside the Grand Hall of Lothair, the aristocracy gathered again. The same nobles who once watched Seraphine Veilcrest be cast out now sat in tighter silence. Duke Alaric Veilcrest stood among them, unchanged in posture but not in expression. His eyes no longer carried certainty, they carried calculation, and something dangerously close to doubt. "You are unsettled," murmured Lady Isolde Viramont beside him. "I am observant," Alaric replied coldly. But even he could not ignore the truth. The name Seraphine was being spoken again, not as a scandal, but as a question. At the far end of the hall the doors opened, not loudly, not dramatically, just once, and the entire room changed. Seraphine Veilcrest entered the grand hall of Luther. For a moment no one spoke, because they did not recognize her. Not immediately. The ivory silk had been replaced with a refined deep ivory and midnight regalia gown, structured with silver armor-like embroidery along the waist and sleeves, a sapphire mantle flowing behind her like a declaration rather than a memory. Her raven-black hair was now fully braided in a controlled aristocratic crown style. Her emerald eyes no longer carried shock or grief, only command. Behind her walked Cale Draven and two silent attendants bearing sealed ledgers and crest-marked documents. Only then did recognition spread like fire through dry wood. "Seraphine," someone whispered. "No," another corrected. "That cannot be her." But it was. Duke Alaric Veilcrest took one step forward. Just one. "You were ordered to disappear," he said. Voice controlled but fractured at the edges. Seraphine stopped at the center of the hall, not before him, not beneath him, at the center. "I was ordered to be erased," she corrected calmly. "There is a difference." A ripple moved through the nobles. Alaric's gaze sharpened. "You were exiled." "Yes," she said softly, "and in exile I learned something you failed to notice in your own house." Silence tightened. Seraphine gestured slightly. Cale stepped forward and placed the ledgers onto the marble floor. The sound echoed like judgment. "These are royal trade records," she continued. "Or rather, what remains after someone tried to bury them." A noble leaned forward. "What is this accusation?" "It is not an accusation," Seraphine replied. "It is accounting." She walked slowly across the hall as she spoke, her voice steady, controlled, almost gentle. That made it worse. Erindale was not neglected, it was drained. Funds were rerouted through sealed noble channels. Supply caravans were redirected under false decrees. Entire territories were starved so others could thrive. Her eyes turned slightly toward the council seats, and all signatures lead here. A collective shift. "Uneasy movement," whispered Panic. Duke Alaric's expression hardened. "You forged documents in exile." Seraphine smiled faintly. "Not warm, not kind, patient." "No," she said. "I rebuilt what you thought you destroyed." She raised her hand slightly. One of Cale's attendants stepped forward and revealed a sealed royal insignia document, the crest of the High Auditor of Luther, unmistakable, unquestionable. The hall went still again. Alaric's eyes narrowed. "That office does not respond to you." "It does now," Seraphine replied. Silence again, heavier this time, the kind that arrives when power begins to shift, but no one accepts it yet. Lady Isolde Virimon leaned forward. "What do you want?" Seraphine turned slowly toward her. "I want truth to stop being decided by whoever sits highest," she said. "And I want the name Veilcrest restored from the lie you built around it." Alaric's voice cut through. "You stand in my hall and speak of restoration." Seraphine's gaze met his directly. "I do not stand in your hall," she replied. "You stand in the one I am reclaiming." That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly, not violently, but irreversibly, Cale Draven stepped forward. "By decree of the High Auditor's interim authority, all assets tied to the Erindale suppression network are frozen pending royal adjudication." Panic spread, nobles rose, voices clashed, but Seraphine did not move. She simply watched them react to consequences they never believed would arrive. Duke Alaric stood frozen, not as a ruler, but as a man realizing control had already been dismantled long before this moment. "You planned this," he said quietly. "No," Seraphine replied. "You did." A pause. "You just never imagined I would survive it." Silence again, but different now. Not fear, recognition of loss. Seraphine stepped back slightly, her cloak moving like a shadow of authority. "This is not revenge," she said. "Revenge is emotional. This is correction." She turned toward the exit doors. and correction has only just begun. As she walked out of the grand hall of Luther, no one stopped her, because they finally understood what they had refused to believe the night she was cast out. Seraphine Veilcrest had not been destroyed. She had been reorganized. Outside, the capital still glittered under sunlight, but for the first time it no longer felt untouchable. And now a question remains for you, watching Sandy Love Tales. Do you think Seraphine's return was justice, or the beginning of a greater war hidden beneath the aristocracy? And if you were in her place, would you have chosen revenge or complete reinvention like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one.